Is this some kind of joke, Colonel? The words, sharp and tinged with disbelief, cut through the oppressive heat radiating from the flight line. Chief Warrant Officer Evans, his face tight with professional frustration, didn't look at his commanding officer. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the old man standing beside him. The man, Theodore Brewer, appeared completely unbothered by the heat, the distant roar of jets, or the skepticism in the young officer's voice. He was a relic of another era, dressed in faded, grease-stained coveralls that had clearly seen better decades. His hands, thick with calluses and etched with the fine lines of countless repairs, hung relaxed at his sides. He calmly studied the silent machine before them. An H-64 Apache, top of the line in modern aerial warfare, stood immobile, as lifeless as a museum exhibit, seemingly subdued by an unseen hand. Colonel Davy leaned close, his voice barely audible over the drone of a C-130 taxiing nearby. "Chief, this is Mr. Brewer. He's here to provide a second opinion." Evans let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A second opinion, sir. With all due respect, my team has been working on this aircraft for 72 hours straight. We've run every diagnostic possible, swapped the FEDC, boroscoped the turbine, inspected every millimeter of the fuel lines, and replaced half the sensors. The digital logs show no faults. The machine reports everything is normal, yet the Port T700 engine refuses to spool beyond 50%. We even have General Electric engineers on a video link. What we don't need is..." He gestured vaguely, clearly searching for words. Theodore's eyes never left the Apache. At over 80 years old, his face told the story of a lifetime spent under harsh suns and relentless pressure. Though slightly clouded with age, his gaze held a sharp, unwavering focus. He wasn't merely looking at the helicopter. He was studying its stance, the way it rested on its landing gear, the subtle shine of its composite skin. He was listening to its silence. A small group of younger mechanics stood at a respectful distance. The best of the best, they could interface with a billion-dollar weapon system through a ruggedized laptop, but they had been defeated by this puzzle. Each failed engine test had chipped away at their confidence. Now they watched in quiet curiosity, mixed with the same skepticism their commanding officer openly displayed. Whispers circulated. Who was this man? A retired legend the colonel knew? A good luck charm? "Let him look, Chief," Davies said, his voice sharp and authoritative. Evans gritted his teeth but stepped back, signaling defeat. "Fine. The flight line is yours, Mr. Brewer. Just, please don't touch anything. It's very sensitive equipment." Theodore nodded slowly to the colonel in thanks and began moving. He didn't go straight to the open engine cowling where Evans's team had been focused. Instead, he started at the tail, his gnarled fingers tracing the stabilator with careful attention. He moved deliberately, shuffling with the ease of someone entirely at home among jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Every gesture was precise, every glance intentional. Circling the Apache, his head tilted as if listening for some hidden signal, he appeared less like a technician and more like a farmer inspecting a prized bull. The younger mechanics exchanged amused glances. Finally, he reached the port side and stopped beneath the engine that had confounded the base's finest for 3 days. He didn't look up at the intricate network of tubes, wires, and blades. Instead, he knelt, his old knees creaking in protest, and examined the junction where the engine housing met the fuselage. "Flashlight," he said, his voice rough from disuse. A young sergeant, eager to ease the tension, hurried to hand him a high-powered LED torch. Evans rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "Sir, we've already scanned this with military-grade imaging equipment. A flashlight isn't going to show anything we missed." Theodore ignored him. He accepted the light and swept its beam along the underbelly of the aircraft. He wasn't simply looking. He was studying how the light reflected, how it highlighted the edges of rivets and seams. He placed one hand flat against the metal skin of the helicopter and closed his eyes. To the mechanic, it looked like an old man touching a plane. To Colonel Davies, it was a master connecting with a machine. He had heard the stories, whispers from veterans about a man called the Ghost, a Vietnam-era mechanic who could detect a hairline fracture through 3 inches of steel. Calling Theodore here had been a last resort, a quiet plea to a forgotten guardian of the flight line. After a long minute of this silent communion, Theodore opened his eyes. He rose slowly and reached into the deep pocket of his coveralls, pulling out a small, worn leather roll. With practiced fingers, he untied it. Inside, cushioned in soft cloth, were not the polished, modern tools of today's mechanics, but a set of oddly shaped, hand-forged instruments, polished smooth from decades of use. Evans's jaw tightened. What in God's name are those? Theodore picked one up. It was a long, slender piece of metal, bent at a precise, unnatural angle, its tip honed to a razor-sharp edge. It looked less like a field tool and more like a dental pick forged in a blacksmith's workshop. You are not putting that anywhere near my engine, Evans snapped, finally losing his professional composure. That's it. I'm calling this, sir. I appreciate your effort, but this is a waste of everyone's time. Theodore held the strange tool in his hand, sunlight catching its hand-polished surface. For a brief moment, the world seemed to slow. The distant whine of a jet faded, replaced by the pounding rotor wash of a Huey in a monsoon. The sharp smell of jet fuel mingled with the damp, metallic scent of blood and fear. He wasn't on a pristine American flight line. He was in a muddy clearing in the Asia Valley, rain plastering his hair to his face. A young pilot, pale with shock, was screaming over the storm. "We have to go! They're coming!" The Huey's engine sputtered, a critical linkage severed by shrapnel. There were no spare parts, no tools, just the wreckage of a burned-out truck nearby. In his mind's eye, he saw his younger self hammering a red-hot piece of leaf spring pressed against a rock, shaped and ground into the very tool now held in his hand. He had used it to bypass the damaged linkage, a repair that should have been impossible. And the Huey had lifted off just as the enemy reached the tree line, carrying a dozen wounded men to safety. The tool was more than metal. It was memory. It was promise. Back in the present, Sergeant Miller, a young yet perceptive mechanic who had been observing the exchange, felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest. He had witnessed Evans' treatment of the old man, the blatant disrespect, but he had also noticed the expression in Mr. Brewer's eyes. It was one of unwavering certainty. Miller had seen that same look before in the eyes of a bomb disposal technician, preparing to disarm a complex IED. It was the gaze of someone who perceived a reality others could not, a world of cause and effect invisible to the untrained eye. Evans stepped toward Theodore, hand raised as if to physically stop him. "Mr. Brewer, I am ordering you to step away from the aircraft. You are a civilian, and you are interfering with critical military equipment. Do not force me to call security forces." The threat was the ultimate humiliation, the clear overreach of authority. Arrest loomed in the hot, still air. The other mechanic shifted uneasily. What had started as mere curiosity had escalated into a serious situation. Miller knew he couldn't directly challenge a chief warrant officer. It could end his career. But he also couldn't just stand by. He discreetly pulled out his phone, keeping it low so Evans wouldn't notice. His fingers moved quickly, sending a message not to a colleague, but to the colonel's executive aide, someone he knew was observing the situation from the command tower. The message was short and urgent. "Sir, C.W. Evans is about to have Mr. Brewer escorted off the flight line by SF. He's threatening to detain him. The colonel needs to return immediately." Miller hit send and the message raced across the base network, a small spark of intervention. In that moment, Miller and the others on the line knew something Evans did not. Help was coming. The balance of authority was about to shift, and the quiet courage of the unassuming civilian was poised to be recognized. Inside the climate-controlled command building, Colonel Davies returned to his office, his expression tense. His aide met him at the door, phone in hand. "Sir," he said, holding up the device. It displayed the urgent text from Sergeant Miller on the flight line. Davies took the phone and read the message, his eyes narrowing. Davies' expression tightened. "Get me the base archives." His aide, already anticipating the request, had the number ready. A moment later, a calm voice answered. "Archive Specialist Rowe speaking. Rowe, this is Colonel Davies. I need a service file lookup, Brewer." Theodore Brewer. He would have served from the late 60s to the early 80s in aviation maintenance. There was a rapid tapping of keys on the other end. "One moment, sir. Got it. Brewer, Theodore. Wow. Okay, sir. This file is extensive." "Read me the commendations," Davies ordered, pacing behind his desk. "Yes, sir. Let's see. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit. Distinguished Flying Cross, 16 Air Medals, 1 with a V for Valor. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters." "Sir, the list of commendations spans 4 pages." Davies stopped pacing. What about the citations? The narratives? Right. The Distinguished Service Cross citation reads, "For extraordinary heroism in action on March 12, 1969, Specialist Brewer, with complete disregard for his own safety, remained with a downed medevac helicopter under intense enemy fire. For 6 hours, using improvised tools made from wreckage, he repaired a catastrophically damaged rotor assembly and a severed fuel line, enabling the evacuation of 9 critically wounded soldiers. Sir, there's more. About a dozen citations just like it. Field expedient engine swaps under fire, landing gear repairs in the middle of active missions. They called him the Ghost because he could make grounded aircraft fly again." Davies felt a chill despite the office's air conditioning. He had known Brewer was talented, but this bordered on legend. He was standing on the shoulders of a giant without fully grasping the man's true reputation. "There's a note from General Peterson," the specialist said. Apparently he was one of the pilots Brewer saved. The note reads, "If this man ever requests anything, granted. He is the finest battlefield mechanic this army has ever produced." Full stop. Davies hung up the phone. His aide looked at him, eyes wide. "Sir, get my car," Davies ordered, "and reach 4-star General Peterson. Tell him a ghost from his past is on our flight line, and he's under threat of arrest." Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing, things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you with the help of some experts to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. Back on the tarmac, the situation had escalated. Theodore, holding his unusual handmade tool, ignored Evans's warning entirely, pointing with it as if making a statement. A delicate probe moved toward a spot deep within the engine, hidden beneath a tangle of wires and conduits. "There," Theodore said calmly, pointing. "The bleed air valve's pneumatic line, there's a crack." Evans narrowed his eyes, his face flushed with anger. "That's impossible. We inspected this section twice. The fiber optic camera showed nothing. There is no crack." He stepped forward, blocking Theodore's access. "That's it. I've had enough, Sergeant." He barked at one of the junior mechanics. "Get security forces. Tell them an unauthorized civilian is tampering with military property." The young sergeant hesitated, glancing from the furious chief warrant officer to the unnervingly calm old man, and then to the silent colonel who had brought him there. It was an illegal order, but an order nonetheless. Before he could act, a new sound cut through the tension. Not the roar of a jet or a helicopter, but the sharp squeal of tires on asphalt. A black command vehicle, a Ford Expedition with official markings, came into view. A vehicle with government plates drove straight onto the flight line, violating multiple protocols. It came to a sudden stop just yards from the Apache. The mechanic immediately snapped to attention. Evans spun around, his mouth open in disbelief at the breach of regulations. Colonel Davies stepped out from the passenger side, his expression thunderous. But it was the figure who exited the back seat that left everyone on the flight line stunned. An older man, yet his movements carried a powerful, coiled energy. He wore a flight suit, and on his shoulders rested the 4 shining stars of a full general. His face was set in a mask of serious determination. It was General Peterson, the visiting commander from Army Futures Command. The unexpected appearance of a 4-star general on an active flight line sent a wave of astonishment through the personnel. It was so unprecedented it felt like witnessing a unicorn. Time seemed to pause. The wind stilled. Even the distant hum of the bass faded into silence. Evans's anger dissolved, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. He snapped to the most precise salute of his career. "General, sir, I wasn't aware you were—" General Peterson didn't acknowledge him. He strode past the saluting chief warrant officer, his gaze fixed on a single person. He walked by the advanced helicopter, past the gathered team of expert technicians, and stopped directly in front of Theodore Brewer. The entire flight line seemed to hold its breath. The 4-star general, a man who commanded armies and advised presidents, clicked his heels and raised his hand in the sharpest, most respectful salute Evans had ever seen. It was a salute unlike any other, a gesture of deep respect from a superior to a man who wore no rank insignia, only faded coveralls. "Teddy," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. My God, it's really you. Theodore slowly set down his tool. Recognition flickered in his aged eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Pete, you've gotten old, the general said, letting out a choked laugh. He dropped his salute and glanced at the astonished faces of the mechanics around him. His voice carried across the tarmac, each word striking with undeniable weight. Men, he began, each syllable deliberate. You have the privilege of standing in. This is the presence of a living legend, Theodore Brewer. When I was a 23-year-old captain, my helicopter went down in the Iadrang Valley. We were surrounded under heavy fire and had multiple wounded. No one could reach us. Then Teddy Brewer flew in on a dust-off Huey that shouldn't have been airborne. He landed amidst a hail of bullets, improvised a fix on our damaged engine using only a Leatherman and some wire, and then piloted his own helicopter out, with mine providing a shaky escort, ultimately saving 18 American lives. The man you see before you is not just a mechanic. He is a miracle worker. He turned to Colonel Davies. Colonel Davies pulled out his phone, his hand steady, and read the man's citation aloud so everyone could hear it. His voice was clear and firm as he recounted the story of the distinguished Service Cross, the impossible repair under fire, and the quiet heroism that had never sought attention. As he read, the smirks on the young mechanics' faces disappeared, replaced by genuine awe. They were no longer looking at an old man. They were witnessing a giant. When Davies finished, a profound silence fell over the group. The general's gaze now, as cold and unyielding as granite, the reprimand struck Chief Warrant Officer Evans. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet authority in his tone was more intimidating than any yell. Chief, the general began, his voice low and deliberate, you have millions of dollars in diagnostic equipment, laptops that measure turbine blade tolerance to a millionth of an inch. Yet none of that can teach you to listen. None of it can teach humility. None of it can teach respect. He nodded toward Theodore. This man's hands have preserved more lives by keeping these machines flying than you will ever learn from a screen. Your diagnostics said everything was fine. He listened to the silence, and it told him everything. You failed because you believed you were smarter than the machine. He succeeded because he knew he wasn't. The public correction was thorough, delivered before Evans's entire team. The chief warrant officer, once flushed with anger, now paled with shame. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet the general's gaze. At that moment, Theodore Brewer, the man at the center of the lesson, stepped forward. His movement was measured, deliberate. He addressed the young officer not with triumph but with calm instruction. It's not your fault, son, he said. The unexpected gentleness in his voice was striking. Machines are loud, computers are loud. You were trained to hear that noise. But the machine itself, it whispers the truth. You just need to be quiet enough to listen. He raised the handmade tool, crafted in the crucible of combat. Your scope didn't reveal the crack because it's a pressure fracture. It only opens under the specific stress of a 50% spool-up. It's invisible when the engine is cold and static. Your diagnostics search for a state of being. I was listening for a moment of becoming. The moment it breaks. As he spoke, another memory surfaced. Sharp and clear was the memory. Not of crafting the tool, but of using it. His younger self stood in that muddy clearing, pressing the tool's tip against the damaged linkage of the Huey. He wasn't merely observing. His fingers, his whole arm had become a sensor, detecting subtle discordant vibrations, tiny tremors that revealed where the metal was weakest. The tool wasn't just a wrench. It was an extension of his own senses, a channel for knowledge forged in urgent necessity. He had learned to sense the breaking point. Back on the scorching tarmac, he turned to Evans. You don't find a problem like this with your eyes. You find it with your hands. In the aftermath, everything moved with deliberate focus. Following Theodore's exact instructions, the maintenance crew, including a humbled and now silent CWO Evans, carefully removed the indicated pneumatic line. Under a microscope in the maintenance bay, the fracture was revealed. Almost invisible to the naked eye, a hairline crack no thicker than a spider's thread, but precisely where Theodore had said it would be. The part was replaced and the Apache's cowling sealed. With General Peterson and Colonel Davies observing, the pilot began the startup sequence. The port engine spooled up 50%, then 60%, then 80% until it reached a steady, deafening roar. The ghost in the machine had been laid to rest. General Peterson turned to Colonel Davies. "I want a new mandatory training module developed for every maintenance crew on this base and distributed across the Army Aviation Branch. Call it Advanced Tactile Diagnostics and Intuitive Engineering. And the lead instructor," he added, placing a hand on Theodore's shoulder, "will be Mr. Brewer, if he accepts the position." The next day, a formal base-wide commendation recognized Theodore not only for his discovery, but also officially documented his legendary service for a new generation. Co Evans wasn't disciplined in the usual sense. His lesson came as the first student in Theodore's new class. Weeks later, the scene was quieter. In the base's main workshop, Evans stood at a workbench awkwardly using a hand file on a small aluminum block. His movements were hesitant. He tried to replicate one of the simple handmade tools from Theodore's leather roll and failed repeatedly. A shadow fell across the bench. Theodore stood beside him with a steaming mug of coffee. He watched silently for a moment before setting the mug down. Without mentioning the incident on the flight line, he gently adjusted Evans's grip on the file. "Easy now," he said, voice a low rumble. "Don't fight it. Let the tool do the work. Feel how it wants to cut." Under the veteran's guidance, Evans's strokes grew smoother, more confident. Still clumsy, he was no longer forcing the tool against the metal. He was listening. He was beginning to understand. In the quiet of the workshop, away from pressure and noise, a different kind of repair was happening, one of mentorship, humility, and the timeless transfer of knowledge. Theodore Brewer's story reminds us that the greatest tools aren't always in a box. They're in the hands and hearts of those who came before. True expertise is earned in fire, not downloaded from a screen. If this story of quiet valor inspired you, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories, and share it with someone who respects the masters who work in silence.